I don't know about you, but in watercolor paintings, the way I paint, very often the painting can take a downward turn as regards quality and outcome. And I can get halfway through a painting and to me, it looks complete rubbish. And I'm sure many people, particularly if you're a starter, you might sort of give up on painting a watercolor. So in this video, I want to give those of you that go into a painting halfway through and they think, right, I'm going to give up now, going to stop it, go off and do something else, a bit of encouragement to think, well, just plow on and go to the end and then do the debrief at the end. You know, be a bit more critical when you get to the end. Don't give up halfway through. Hello, my name is Tim Wilmot, a watercolor painter and tutor creator up on here on YouTube, creating demo videos. And in this video, I'm going to take this lovely picturesque scene of Fréjus in southern France. Hopefully I pronounced it right to the locals. Apologies if I didn't. Fréjus in southern France. Very pretty part of France I think it's near Saint Raphael. I think it's near the coast or on the coast. And a very pretty scene, light behind us, quite a challenge from a watercolor point of view with the light behind us. Sometimes the light's easier when it's coming towards us from the side. But a pretty street scene, lovely colours, lots of contrasts as well. This photograph, thanks very much to Judy, a Patreon member. Thanks very much, Judy, for sharing this image of Fréjus. But a good exercise from a watercolour point of view and a painting point of view with all this perspective. I'm going to be talking about composition. I'm going to be talking about wet in wet. I'm going to be talking about colours, values, contrast, different brushes, and the paints I use as well. Hope you enjoy it. Let's see how we get on. Paper I'm using is Saunders Waterford. This is cold press, and the size is 15 inches across by 11 inches down. I've secured it with DIY masking tape, and first I'm doing my outline drawing. Well, the first decision I made is to change the orientation of the scene from portrait to landscape, just to get in more of the sense of the houses on the left and a little bit more of the houses on the right. There's a lot of perspective here, and it's important in this initial drawing to get the perspective right, particularly on the right-hand side. The top edge of the roof is almost vertical on the right-hand side, and then on the left-hand side I've got a tiny bit of a curve. In the photograph the buildings are quite straight, but I'm introducing a little bit of a curve to this, which I think will be a little bit more attractive, and then just marking out the size of the houses, then the street level, going up to the end of the houses on the left. There's a bit of a shadow there on the right, car on the right hand side in the sun, but nestled up right against the right hand building. Back over to that. You see I'm just darting around here. As I look at the photograph, I see little points of interest, and I just put those in. Balancing up the car, a figure, just the left of centre, so nothing in the middle, but a car to the right, balanced with a figure on the left. Then the side of the building right next to the car. I'll just get in some major windows here. That's a pretty key one there with some shutters either side. One up near the roof edge. I'm actually pressing quite hard with the pencil in some stages here, making quite a dark line. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter if the pencil lines show through in the final painting. They probably won't too much. But it's important just to get in the main shapes. And sometimes I might do a bit of cross-hatching where the shadows will be, just so that in my own mind I can see exactly where the darks are going to be. And it's important to get this drawing as right as I can, because going to the painting stage, if things aren't too correct, it can be difficult to for me to turn things around while I'm painting away. And I can't freehand paint. I've got to have that outline drawing to guide me and get in those main objects. So it's down to the composition and the balance. And I think it's about right there with that figure and the car and the amount of sky that's showing. I haven't drawn in the background trees. Right at the end of the street, there's some trees higher up. We can just see the canopy above the houses at the end of the street. Not bothered with that, but I'll paint that in freehand. So I've got some water now, clear water, just pre-wetting the entire upper portion of the scene, and then down to the bottom as well. But I certainly want to make that upper portion quite damp and evenly damp as well. So I'm just using a mop brush now to go over this and glancing at the paper at an angle, just trying to make sure there's no puddles of water, nothing that's been left too dry. And this will help me get in some, well, it's going to help lay down a nice flat wash. And also where I want some soft edges, for example, at the end of the street, where the side of the houses meet the sky. I'm not going to go so dark in the sky. I think it's quite dark blue in the actual source photograph. I'm going to go a little bit lighter, but still get the sense of the brightness of the scene and the cool blue of the sky and the warmth of those buildings. Now I'm mixing up quite a vibrant blue there. This is I'll get the colour in a minute. It's I think it's a cerulean blue permanent. It's quite a dark blue. It's almost like a permanent ultramarine blue, like a fluorescent ultramarine blue. But I think that might give me a little bit of a help in getting a vibrant sky. Not a normal blue I use. The normal colours I use, going down my palette from the top, neutral tint, then burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, Windsor red, light red, cadmium orange, lemon yellow. Then going across the bottom I've got a lavender and then this blue. Just had a look at the my tubes of paint. It's cerulean blue hue, this bright blue that I started off with. Not a normal one I use, but gives me quite, as I say, a head start in that depth of blue, that strong blue I want. So paper being damp, I've gone over the edges of the buildings. Gives me that little bit of a soft edge to play with. I lifted off a little bit where the blue was coming down a little bit too far onto the house. I lifted it off with the brush that was partially dry, and now while everything is still damp, the atmosphere where I'm painting is not too dry. It's fairly humid, but now going in with the base color of the buildings, and it's important for the ones on the left. This will be it. So I need to get these colors right so as sort of pinkish, reddish one. That middle building, if I can call it that, where I am now, that sort of pinkish, reddish colour. And then next to that is a bright yellow one. It actually, in the photograph, it does look a bit like a lemon yellow to me, like a pale yellow. Anyway, watercolour being watercolour, you've got to go in a little bit stronger, a little bit brighter than the actual colour, because things dry a lot paler, a lot lighter. So I have to compensate with that. I've gone over the edge now. The building on the far left, that's going to be red or reddish. And again, to get that soft edge, that soft transition between the two, I've taken the yellow over the dividing line between the two houses, and now go in with this red, brighter red. It's going to dry lighter, mix them up down the bottom, take it down to the street level. The street is, in places, it's a little bit cooler, so I can mix in a bit of blue in there. And I'm using these brush marks in different directions because I just want to have a little bit of a subtle variation in tone. It may, because the paper's damp, things are going to mix around a bit. Watercolor is still traveling around on this damp paper. Now on the right hand side, this building is a bit darker, so I'm going a tiny bit stronger, cooler. A lot of this side will be covered with shadows. I can go down that bottom right corner, I can go a lot darker still. Bit of lavender I'm picking up now. The brush I'm using is a Raphael Soft Aqua brush, and it's a size 6. So I'm using that little bit of lavender for the shutters and letting that blend in with the yellow. And there's another shutter at the ground level. Bit of cobalt green. For the green, there's a light green, sort of almost, I'd call it a sort of sage green on the right hand side. But quite a bit of these shutters will be obliterated by the shadows coming across. And it's at this stage that a lot of people could think, well, this painting looks as if it's going in the wrong direction, give up. But you just got to persevere with watercolour. Things do look an awful lot worse as you get into the painting, for me anyway, and then I kind of try and pull it back. I'm just lifting out a tiny bit of the colour in the window recess just to give a tiny bit of light to the inside of the window, particularly those on the right hand side. And another shutter here. The paper is still damp. I'm getting a soft edge, but we can make these edges a little bit harder when the paint's dry and I go in with a shadow behind the shutter. This is just to get in that base colour of those shutters. But when I add detail around them and a bit of shadow, they'll immediately look a little bit more realistic. The tree in the distance, it's not, I wouldn't describe it as green, it's got a sort of golden hue to it, so I used a bit of orange and yellow ochre for this. Paper's still damp there at the back of the street, so I'm getting ever so subtle soft edge, but as the paper's drying it will get hard. I need to be very careful about applying paint that's not too watery, otherwise I'll get a nasty bloom appearing, which I may not want. Right, I've swapped over brushes now, gone down to a smaller mop brush. This is a squirrel mop brush from let me just, yeah, Winsor & Newton, this one. Do have a few squirrel mop brushes. So I'm mixing now a dark shadow mix. I want some soft shadows on the left-hand buildings. So I've got to work quite quickly here to get in before the paper dries completely. And then from the side, just apply a little bit to see what it's going to do. Maybe go a bit thicker here. Mixing is very important, and as is the brush head shape. So there's not too much water on this brush now, and I can create these sort of shapes that is being caused by some kind of a tree behind us. So the light is obviously coming from behind us. There's some sort of a tree behind us or above the tops of the buildings that's creating these shadows going across the left-hand buildings. If I think things are going a little bit too light, I can darken the colour up with that neutral tint there. Now it's important not to overdo this too much. I will go in with some darker colours after this is all dried, just to create some form to the buildings and windows and the planters and hanging baskets, the flowers that are there. So once it's done, try and resist the temptation to go back in and add in another layer while it's still this damp. Now I'm mixing up some darker colour to go across the street. And the shadow coming down the walls is connecting with the shadow going across the street. I don't want any big sudden transition from one area to the other. So they're a similar value, I think, would work well. Pretty tricky going around that figure. That figure for me, just sort of in the sunlight, but the legs partially hidden in the shadows, and then coming across the street, maybe a little bit harder with the edge on these shadows going across the street, and I've got a little sort of indentation in the edge of that shadow where there looks like there's a sort of drainage, little drainage trench that's coming down the street, a little sort of gutter thing, and come over to the right hand side, keeping it fairly cool, plenty of blues. Meet up with that car. I think it's a Mini in the photo, but mine can be just any kind of generic car. I don't want it to particularly look like anything. Now I'm adding in a bit of yellow, almost neat yellow, into the shadows in the foreground. Just I sense in the photograph there's a bit of that bright light that's hitting the yellow building is being reflected back down onto the street. So just I could have done that. I could have done that on the base, on that first wash I put in. I could have put a strong yellow in there. So as I did the yellow of the house, I could have brought that right down into the street and gone in quite deep with that yellow, and then apply it on the top. Now I've just lifted out a bit of that gutter, that trench that's coming down. It's a lot lighter in the shadows. Try and stop myself from overworking it too much. Now, if you want to try out paintings like this, on my Patreon site, patreon.com/Tim Wilmot, TIMWILMOT. Think of it like a club. I know there are lots of platforms, Facebook groups on for watercolor, but this is more of a little club where it's not Facebook, no adverts, you're not going to be tracked as regards what you click on. But it's a nice friendly club that I've got going where we've got a pretty active community of sharing our pictures, and I set monthly projects like this or similar to this where everyone can have a go. And depending on, with Patreon, you've got different levels of commitment or different levels of subscription, if you like, different tiers. And then depending on which tier you go for, you can get a critique from me. So you have a go, you follow along with video like this, and certainly you can ask me questions. Oh, we also do, normally once a month, a little live stream where I can actually go through in a bit more detail the actual project and answer everyone's questions. So give people a bit of a heads up on that project. Yes, you get the critiques. We've got a photo sharing feature as well, and lots of material that you just won't find on YouTube or any other platform. So some exclusives up there for people that want to help me along with that bit of support and creating videos like this. So take a look at that, patreon.com/Tim Wilmot. Give it a go. Now, I've whipped out the hairdryer and got things a little bit drier because I do need some hard edges at this stage. So all nice and dry now. Touch the paper just to make sure it's quite dry, and then starting from the top or from the left-hand corner, because I'm right-handed, generally I'll be working that kind of direction, top left to bottom right. And then these shadows at the top of the buildings, there's lots of little sort of subtle light coming through where the the gutter, where the gutter is running just underneath the edge of the tiles, and it creates these funny little lights here and there, that gap, and then darker still on a little overhang at the top of the buildings, which I'll get in now. And this brush, having a soft brush like this, it's not going to, there's a nice application of paint. I find it quite easy to get the paint coming off the brush, and you get a nice, it doesn't look overworked, and it's quite smooth to lay it down, and doesn't appear overworked. You get a good, if you've got a good brush, you get a good edge to it as well. So I can be, like I'm doing now, trying to get a nice edge to it. And then depending on how you're holding your brush, you can get quite loose with your style by holding the brush at the end and not too near the tip. Right, going down the length of the building and just giving a hint to that, a little bit of a curve. It isn't curved in the photograph, but I just think it needed it. Bit more interesting end to that building. There's some sort of junction point for, maybe it's electric cables. I think it's electric cables. Maybe someone will tell me whether it's telephone or electric. It's not gas anyway. Up there on the right, creating some little quirky shadows. And then, just check my point, and then a bit of a dark shadow for this first complete window here. Just make sure I get the end of the building quite right, then a bit lower down, that the building is creating a shadow on the building going beyond. A little bit of a shadow underneath the rooftops of the far buildings. And then it looks like there's a sort of smaller, lower building adjoining the bigger left-hand buildings to the ones at the end of the street. If I notice I've gone a bit too dark, I might just lift it off with my fingertips. Or if it's a bit more substantial, I might reach for a paper towel or a damp brush just to lift off the paint. Now we're over to the right-hand side. So very dark. When I look at a picture and plan painting, I try to think where are the real darks in the picture? Where can I get the most impact or contrast between light and dark? And I think it's definitely here on the right hand side, that little, where I put that dark first of all, and the light hitting the side that's facing us. There's quite a big area of contrast there. So I'm now just beginning to get a bit of form to these shutters. That one on the left, you can see immediately it's giving it a bit more depth, a bit more of a three-dimensional form. And from what I saw after the initial washes were laid down, when the painting looked in a pretty sorry state. Hopefully it's now beginning to pull back. We're beginning, as we're adding these darks, we're beginning to add more form and more depth and more interest to the painting. And it's gradually beginning to look a little bit better. The shadows on these, in these windows, and the shadows created by the shutters that are partially open, they're just sort of geometric shapes, and that's what I look at in the subject, is just what these shapes are, not really trying to think about the shape of the shutter as such, but just the thinking about the shapes of those shadows, triangular, rectangular, whatever. Now, back to the right-hand side. Quite a bit darker on this side than any shadows on the left-hand side. There's a bit of glare being caused with my lighting. Apologies for that, but as it dries, you'll see what value that is, and as it dries. Now, as I come down, I need this to blend in a little bit with the shadows going across the street, so I basically smudged with my finger. Just move it around a bit, smudge it together, and then back up on the right hand side. And a mop brush like this, very good for drawing or painting some nice shadow shapes. And here, holding my brush and running from right to left, there's these shadows that will help draw the eye, hopefully draw the eye into the scene with their shape and their direction, and different edges and intensities of shadow. It obviously needs to be, the colour needs to be a sort of darker colour than the building, so that red. And then just continue on down up to the edge and create the edge of this sort of partially open shutter here. When the shutters are just sort of half open, there's a gap down the middle, and they're sort of open at an angle. Now, darker towards the bottom of the building and coming down into the corner. There's a sort of greenish, I think it might be a garage door, but quite in the bottom right corner there's some large doors that, to me, they look a little bit green. So that's why I mixed that viridian green and cobalt green, but any sort of green in there, just to give a hint of a doorway or something down there. But it's in the bottom right corner. We don't want to be too bothered with the detail of that. Right, change of brush again. My third brush is a small synthetic round brush from Jack's Hair, they're called, and it's a size 5. Probably one of the cheapest brushes I've got, I think about £2 or £3, $2 or $3. And now I find it quite nice. It's round, it's got a very good point to it, and I'm just mixing in some darker, thicker colour, not much water now, and applying this to the far side of the street, creating some form around the car. I'm going to go around the car with this darker shadow. The car is parked right up against the building. I guess it's quite a narrow street, this, so the car has to park right up. It's a left-hand drive car, so the back is facing us. Now, back to my medium mop brush to get in a bit of the back window there, and then the body of the car. Let's make it a little bit sort of a green car. I think the Mini is the sort of dark green car, so I'll likewise keep it a little bit green, tiny bit of a reflection on the top of the boot, excuse me, and then down to the base, the bottom of the body of the car, and I'll go in with some dark shadows in a minute. As well as Patreon, I've got some regular online workshops on my Crowdcast site. This is an events platform for creators and musicians. If you go to crowdcast.io/Tim Wilmot, you'll see all of my future workshops, and you can also still take part in previous workshops as well. But for a small fee, you get to participate in these live workshops and then send in your painting for a critique. And this is nothing to do with Patreon, it's totally separate. But every month we choose different subjects on Crowdcast. And as I say, nothing to do with Patreon. I've got these two different strands, two different activities going. Patreon's more of a club, more of a sort of watercolor only club, whereas Crowdcast is more for those people that want to dip in one month and then maybe not bother with the following month if they don't like the subject. Doesn't matter. Everyone's got likes and dislikes about what they want to paint. But I find it's quite a flexible format to circulate all these different topics and have different ones going on Crowdcast. So still with the smaller brush, let's get in some face for the figure. Perhaps there's a bit of skin colour at the shoulders, arms. We'll keep the figure nice and simple, lightly clothed. Neutral tint, Windsor red, Halogen crimson. Something dark for that window. I'm just applying details now to some of these shutters, a few lines. Generally they've got a sort of supporting brace across the top. It looks like a sort of Z in a way, the back of these shutters. I think those middle ones are going to have more of a sort of slats to them. Just here on the left, I sense there's some sort of maybe a climbing rose or something like that growing up the front of the building. So in quite a haphazard way, I've taken that brush and just the paper's still a little bit damp, so I've got a few soft edges there. Right, there's a downpipe here coming down, strong vertical mark for the painting, and down a little bit further, picked up a bit of burnt umber there. Doesn't really matter, it's just really something dark and not too much water in it. Not black though. I think black would be too strong for some of the elements here in the shadows. Don't want it too dark. This paint will dry a little bit lighter. There's a few, 2 or 3 bollards in the middle of the street here, so I've just created the impression of those. Just a few. Again, it's a few more vertical lines, just a bit more of an interest, filling in that street there in the bottom left corner. There's a very, very pretty window here. In the photograph, it's quite colourful with pots and planters hanging around. I guess the photograph is taken in the summer sometime, but I'm not putting in too much detail in there. I want the focus to be the eye going down the street and the light at the end of the street. That's my key focal point, if you like. Taking the eye on a journey just to up the street there. Don't want it to be lingering around on the in the shadows. Porch over the doorway. And it's quite dark here in the doorway. I'm not going to make it so dark in my painting, just give the hint of an opening there. There's the shutters, and on the left hand side as well. And some horizontal slats to these shutters. And then just to the right-hand side of the yellow building, I need some vertical lines. There's some shadows going across the building, but some pipes and shadows from these cables. There's 4 colours there. There's red, halogen crimson, burnt umber, neutral tint, anything dark. I could have added in some ultramarine blue for the fun of it. I'll just drag that shadow down a little bit just to meet this figure, and then behind the figure just another diagonal line there. Tiny sort of opening. I'm not sure if it's a window, but it's almost at street level, and that little that white patch just beyond the figure. Another shutter there. As I'm getting into the distance, I need to make sure the lines are a little bit fainter, a little bit softer, because it's in the distance. I don't want them to be too hard or too thick, so don't need to overdo it. Then on the right hand side there's a street lamp or something or other there on the side of the building. Back to the car, a bit more detail to the windscreen, but be careful not to overdo it. Some details, the back bumper there, continuation of the gutter. Need to fill in that little top right corner of the yellow pudding just a tiny bit. Looks pop in some lines later on. Now, these cables going across the street, I could have used a rigger brush for this, or a sword brush. I've got this brush handy, and do a bit of lost and found here. Drag the brush across, just a few little gaps here and there. And a bit more of a shadow around the car. And the windows on the right hand side. So the second wash I put in gave me some of these window openings, just a few little vertical slithers of thin light, and then I strengthen those up with a bit of dark paint around that. So like I was doing on the left hand side, I'm just getting a bit more definition to some of the details to the building on the right. Windows, the shutters I'll have to do, and a bit more of a definition to the top of the ground story. Now this shutter here does have a lot more of these little horizontal slats, so I'll put those in, trying to think about perspective a little bit, so a bit steeper at the top, becoming a little bit more horizontal down towards the bottom, and the right hand side of those shutters, dividing line between the two buildings, make that a bit stronger, and then take that up to these shutters, underneath the shutters, and over to the right hand side. So that's helping with the perspective a bit. We've got that strong line there, strongish line at the base of the building, and then right at the top, that almost vertical black shadow underneath the eaves of the roof. A few lines going up the street, a bit like those shadows on the right hand building. Helps take the viewer up the street a little bit. So I just need to finalize off some of these details now before what have I got left to do? I've got to do the tail lights of the car. I've got, well, maybe a little bit of highlighting with some white paint as well. That's just the window ledge of the top window. Connect that down to the side. Be careful not to overdo the figure, especially with the legs, because the legs they're in this bright light. The shadow of that figure would be, well, it would be behind it somewhere. So I don't want to overdo the leg detail. Really, with these cables going across the street. You can put them anywhere and they serve a good purpose of filling in the sky, connecting the left-hand side to the right-hand side. There's some quirky angles to them as well, not have them all parallel with each other. They're all at different angles. Some of them are vertical, some of them are horizontal, 45 degrees. An opportunity for a bit of contrast, dark lines against a lighter background. Try and make those shutters a little bit stronger with some lavender and cerulean blue, and a bit more up here as well, just to make them a bit stronger. Careful not to obliterate my little dark lines that I put in. A few more lines in the street, but not too dark. So now for some white paint, I've got a little rigger brush here from Lebenson, where you can get some really fine, very narrow lines, almost the thickness of a hair. Just want to use this brush very carefully, getting a few little bits of light around the tiles, give them a bit of definition there, just a few of them. It would be impossible to, or very difficult to, do some negative painting around it. It's a lot easier, a bit more impact with some use of the white paint. Not too much though. Take on just a few highlights down to the end of the street there, and then I'll need to pick up on just a few of the cables as well. Bit of light hitting some bits of wood on the shutters. Sometimes do a bit of a highlight on figures. If I've got a figure coming towards me in sunlight, I might put just a little bit of white paint to indicate the nose. I think it just adds a bit of interest to a figure. Maybe some for the ears as well, or any sort of or a bit of their forehead, or they're wearing glasses or something like that. Just helps add a bit more interest. So a tiny bit of white paint around some little subtle areas of the painting. So a little bit there just to create a bit more of a frame. I'm not going to do all of the frames of the windows, just a hint of a little cross piece to the frame and maybe some light on the gutters and the downpipes as well. So as I normally do, just a quick summary of the painting, and being a bit, trying to give myself a little bit of a critique, trying to be realistic on what went well, what didn't go so well, maybe lessons to be learned. But so it was quite a bright scene in Fréjus, southern France, and the light behind us, creating this quite a lot of contrast in the scene, but some tricky shadows and the perspective to deal with. I went for that kind of a curved feeling to that building. I think that worked quite well. Soft edges here also, where I pre-wet the paper to get those soft edges, so a bit soft here, that transition there. While I'm up there, that area, big area of contrast, so quite dark there, a little bit light to the right of it, the side facing us. Some dramatic shadows and different edges as well, that's important with watercolor. So we had soft edges here when I did the wet in wet, and then as the paint was drying, as the wash was drying, I could get a harder edge going up there, but soft over here. And then some drama with the shadows, trying to think about perspective and these lines, drawing the eye down into the scene. Composition as well. The car in the photograph was quite small, so I made it a bit bigger, occupying that space there, sort of on that kind of that third there, and then getting another figure on that third, just to have a nice balance between the two. Could have put in a couple of figures in there as well. And I used a range of brushes. So big mop brush to start with, gradually going down in size in brushes as I was getting a bit more detailed with the work. And also I covered the paint to water ratio, which is often people ask me about, is the ratio of paint to water. And obviously when I started, there was quite a lot of water in the ratio to water to paint, but then as I got a bit more detailed with some of these darks, particularly here, that's almost pure pigment, that paint there. Where else did I do it? Yeah, on the left-hand side as well. And then that dark shadow in there, I went, some of these shadows was almost pure paint. And the white, just a little bit of, not overdoing it with the white paint, but that was pure paint as well. So if you want to have a go yourself at things like this, have a look at patreon.com/Tim Wilmot. I'll be happy to have you join us. Just choose the tier that you would like, and we look forward to seeing you on my live streams and taking part in the painting projects, share your photographs, join in the community. But hopefully you enjoyed that. Catch up with you on the next one.